I never expected that traveling 2.7 million light-years across the galaxy would lead me to discover an Earth so perfectly identical to ours that it defied every law of physics until I realized someone had been watching us, studying us, and preparing this replica for decades. The beings who greeted us looked human, acted human, even smiled like humans. But when I saw what they'd been doing to the people from our dimension who'd arrived before us, I understood we'd walked straight into a trap that had been centuries in the making. What I found in those underground chambers will make you question everything you think you know about humanity's place in the universe. But are you prepared to learn why they needed us alive? The alarm screamed through Research Station Omega-7 at exactly 3:47 in the morning, jolting me awake from another nightmare about failing my doctoral defense. Red emergency lights painted the walls of my tiny sleeping quarters like blood, and the station's computer voice kept repeating the same terrifying message: unknown energy signature detected. All personnel report to stations immediately. I threw on my lab coat over my pajamas and ran barefoot through the corridors, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I reached the main laboratory, chaos had already taken over. Dr. Armando Reyes, our station commander, stood surrounded by flickering holographic displays showing energy readings that made my stomach drop. His weathered face looked pale under the emergency lighting, and his hands shook as he pointed at the massive spikes of data streaming across our sensors. The numbers were impossible. We were detecting power levels that could fuel entire cities coming from empty space where nothing should exist. My name is Mira Chen, and I'm supposed to be the expert on weird space phenomena. For the past 18 months, I've been stationed on this research platform orbiting a dying star, studying quantum mechanics and interdimensional theory. But the readings flashing across our screens right now were beyond anything I'd ever seen in textbooks or scientific journals. The energy signatures weren't just strange, they were actively defying the laws of physics, pulsing with patterns that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Dr. Elena Vasquez burst through the laboratory doors, her dark hair messy from sleep and her eyes wide with excitement. She'd been my research partner since graduate school, the only person on the station who still believed in my theories about parallel dimensions. Most of the other scientists thought my ideas were crazy, especially after my last 3 experiments had failed spectacularly. But Elena always stood by me, even when the evidence seemed to prove everyone else right. "Mira, you need to see this," she gasped, pulling up a new display on her tablet. "The energy signatures aren't random. They're following mathematical sequences. The same equations you've been working on for dimensional travel." Her fingers flew across the screen, highlighting specific data points that made my breath catch in my throat. The patterns were identical to my theoretical calculations, formulas I'd never shared with anyone except Elena. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone, or something, out there, wasn't just sending random signals into space. They were using my research, my private equations, to communicate across impossible distances. But how could they know about my work? And why were they trying to contact us now, after months of silence from the depths of space? Dr. Marcus Dane, our communications specialist, looked up from his station with confusion written across his face. "Commander Reyes, the signals aren't coming from any known star system. According to our navigation computers, they're originating from coordinates that match Earth's exact position, but in a different dimensional space." His voice cracked on the last words, as if he couldn't believe what he was saying. The room fell silent except for the humming of our equipment and the distant rumble of the station's life support systems. Everyone stared at the main display screen, where a 3-dimensional map showed the signal's origin point overlapping perfectly with our home planet's location. But the readings indicated this other Earth existed in a parallel dimension, separated from us by barriers that shouldn't be crossable with current technology. Commander Reyes cleared his throat, his military training helping him stay calm despite the impossible situation. "Dr. Chen, you're our interdimensional specialist. What's your professional opinion about these readings?" His question carried weight. The entire research team was looking at me for answers I wasn't sure I had. I studied the data streaming across multiple screens, my mind racing through possibilities that seemed straight out of science fiction movies. The energy patterns were too complex to be natural phenomena, too organized to be random cosmic events. They showed clear signs of intelligence, of purpose, of someone deliberately trying to establish contact across the void between dimensions. "Sir, based on the mathematical precision of these signals, I believe we're receiving a deliberate transmission from an alternate version of Earth I said, my voice steady despite the excitement building in my chest. The senders know about our research, and they're using our own theories to bridge the gap between dimensions. Elena stepped closer to the main display, her scientific curiosity overriding any fear she might have felt. But Mira, if there's really another Earth out there, why are they contacting us specifically? Out of all the research stations in the galaxy, why choose a small outpost studying dying stars? Her question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding an answer none of us were prepared to give. The energy readings suddenly spiked again, causing every screen in the laboratory to flicker and buzz. New data began flooding our systems, more complex than before, carrying what looked like detailed technical specifications and star charts. But embedded within the scientific information was something that made my blood run cold. Biological data that perfectly matched human DNA sequences, as if someone had been studying our species for a very long time. The transmission lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds, filling our computers with more data than we'd collected in the previous 6 months combined. When the signals finally stopped, the laboratory fell into an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Every scientist on the research team stood frozen, staring at screens full of information that challenged everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. Elena was the first to break the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Mira, look at Section 7 of the transmission. They're not just sending us random information, they're showing us how to build a device that could transport matter between dimensions. Her fingers trembled as she highlighted specific portions of the technical specifications, diagrams that looked like blueprints for technology decades ahead of our current capabilities. I leaned over her shoulder to study the plans more closely, my excitement growing with each detail I absorbed. The device they were describing used quantum resonance fields to create temporary bridges between parallel realities. The math was incredibly advanced, but it followed logical principles that built upon my own research. Someone had taken my theoretical work and turned it into practical engineering. Commander Reyes paced back and forth behind us, his military boots clicking against the metal floor in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you directly. Have you shared your dimensional research with anyone outside this station? Any conferences, academic papers, or private communications? His tone suggested he already suspected the answer, but needed to hear it confirmed. No, sir, absolutely not, I replied without hesitation. My theoretical framework for interdimensional travel has never been published or presented publicly. The only person who knows the complete equations is Elena, and even she doesn't have access to all my calculations. The truth of that statement made the situation even more disturbing somehow. Beings from another dimension had gained access to research that existed only in my private files. Dr. Marcus Dane suddenly straightened at his communications console, his face pale with shock. Commander, I'm detecting a follow-up transmission. It's much weaker than the first one, but it's definitely coming from the same source. He adjusted several controls on his equipment, fine-tuning the reception to capture every bit of data. This one seems more personal. The new signal resolved into audio format, and what we heard made everyone in the laboratory take a step backward. It was a human voice, female, speaking English with a slight accent I couldn't identify. But there was something wrong with the cadence, as if the speaker was carefully pronouncing each word to make sure we understood. Greetings, researchers of Station Omega 7. We have been monitoring your progress with great interest. Dr. Mira Chen, your work on quantum field manipulation has impressed our scientific community greatly. We would very much like to meet you in person to discuss matters of mutual benefit. The voice paused, and in the background, we could hear what sounded like other people talking in languages that were almost familiar, but not quite right. Elena grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through my lab coat. Mira, they know your name. They know which station we're on. How is that even possible? Her voice carried a mixture of excitement and fear that perfectly matched my own emotions. We were witnessing first contact with another version of humanity, but the circumstances felt more like being watched by invisible observers than making a friendly introduction. The transmission continued, and the speaker's tone became more urgent. We understand that dimensional travel may seem impossible with your current technology, but we assure you that safe passage can be arranged. We have prepared detailed instructions for constructing a transport device using materials available on your station. Time is of considerable importance. Other forces are aware of our communications and may attempt to interfere. Commander Reyes held up his hand for silence, his expression grim. Other forces? What other forces? He directed the question at our speakers, as if the mysterious woman could hear us, but of course, there was no response. The transmission was one way, a recorded message sent across the dimensional divide with no possibility of immediate conversation. Dr. Dane worked frantically at his console, trying to trace the signal's path through space and time. Sir, I'm reading massive energy buildups at the transmission source. Whatever technology they're using to contact us, it's requiring enormous amounts of power. This isn't a casual communication, they're putting significant resources into reaching us. The audio message reached its conclusion with words that sent chills down my spine. Dr. Chen, we know you have been facing skepticism about your research from your colleagues and superiors. We offer you the chance to prove your theories correct and make the greatest scientific discovery in human history. But you must decide quickly. The window for safe dimensional travel closes in 72 hours. We await your response. The transmission ended with a series of coordinates that appeared on our navigation screens, showing a location in empty space approximately 6 light hours from our current position. But the coordinates weren't for normal three-dimensional space. They included dimensional parameters that suggested the meeting point existed in a pocket reality between our universe and theirs. Elena and I stared at each other, both realizing that we stood at a crossroads that would define the rest of our lives. In my private laboratory, I had been building a small-scale quantum resonance device based on my theoretical research. It wasn't designed for dimensional travel, just for detecting energy anomalies across parallel realities. But with the technical specifications they'd provided, I could modify it into an actual transport system. Commander, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was proposing. I can build the device they're describing. It will take most of our spare materials and probably violate several safety regulations, but it's theoretically possible. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. 6 hours ago, I'd been a failed researcher picking up coffee mug fragments, and now I was volunteering to be the first human to travel between dimensions. Commander Reyes studied the technical specifications for several long minutes, his military training warring with scientific curiosity. Dr. Chen, if we attempt this and something goes wrong, we could lose you permanently. There would be no rescue mission, no way to bring you back if the technology fails. His concern was genuine, but I could see the spark of excitement in his eyes, the same look every explorer gets when facing the unknown. The decision felt inevitable, like a river flowing toward the sea. Everything in my life had led to this moment. My research, my failures, my determination to prove that the impossible was just another word for not yet discovered. Elena squeezed my hand, and I knew she would support whatever choice I made, even if it meant watching me disappear into another dimension. The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered to the floor as sparks erupted from the quantum resonance chamber, sending bright orange flames dancing across the laboratory walls. I had been working for 36 hours straight, fueled by nothing but coffee and the terrifying excitement of building humanity's first interdimensional transport device. My hands shook from exhaustion and caffeine as I grabbed the fire extinguisher, but Elena was already there, spraying white foam across the burning components, with the efficiency of someone who dealt with my explosive experiments before. Commander Reyes burst through the laboratory doors, his face grim with the weight of impossible decisions. Behind him stood Dr. Sarah Martinez from the station's medical bay, her arms crossed and her expression clearly stating she thought we'd all lost our minds. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Half the research team believed we were on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history, while the other half worried we were about to accidentally destroy ourselves and possibly the entire space station. Dr. Chen, we've received another transmission, Commander Reyes announced, his voice carrying an urgency that made my stomach clench. This one is different. They're not just offering to meet us anymore. They're warning us about something called the Others, who apparently don't want this contact to happen. He activated a portable speaker that filled the room with static before resolving into that same eerily perfect human voice we'd heard before. The woman from the other dimension sounded more stressed this time, her carefully pronounced words coming faster than in the previous message. Dr. Chen, our monitoring systems have detected interference patterns, suggesting hostile entities are aware of our communication attempts. These beings have been observing your dimension for much longer than we have, and they view any contact between our realities as a threat to their objectives. You must complete your transport device quickly and meet us at the designated coordinates before they can intervene. Eleanor looked up from the damaged equipment, foam still dripping from her protective goggles. Mira, who are the others she's talking about? And what objectives could they possibly have that involve our dimension? Her questions echoed the fears that had been growing in my mind since we'd first received the transmissions. We weren't just dealing with friendly parallel humans anymore. There were apparently multiple groups with conflicting interests, and we were caught in the middle of some kind of interdimensional conflict. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her medical training making her the voice of caution that everyone needed to hear. Commander, from a safety perspective, we're talking about sending people into a completely unknown situation with experimental technology that's never been tested. Doctor, Chen's device might work perfectly, or it might scatter her atoms across multiple dimensions. We have no way to predict the biological effects of dimensional travel on the human body. The weight of her words settled over the laboratory like a heavy blanket. I knew she was right. Everything we were doing was based on theoretical physics and alien instructions that we couldn't verify. But the alternative was to ignore the greatest opportunity in human history and potentially leave Earth vulnerable to these mysterious others who had their own plans for our reality. The choice felt impossible, but it was mine to make. Dr. Dane's voice crackled over the intercom system, interrupting our debate with news that made everyone freeze in place. Commander, I'm detecting massive energy surges from the coordinates where we're supposed to meet the other humans. But I'm also picking up different signals from 12 other locations around our solar system. Whatever's happening out there, it's bigger than just one group trying to make contact. The implications hit me like a physical blow to the chest. If there were energy signatures at 12 different locations, that meant multiple factions were actively operating in our local space. The other dimension wasn't just sending us friendly messages. We had somehow triggered what looked like a gathering of interdimensional forces, all converging on our small corner of the galaxy. We weren't just making first contact anymore. We were potentially starting an interdimensional war. Elena helped me lift the repaired quantum resonance chamber back into position, both of us working with the desperate efficiency of people who knew time was running out. The device looked like something from a science fiction movie, a cylindrical chamber surrounded by spinning rings of metal and crystal, all connected by cables that pulsed with blue energy. According to the specifications we'd received, it should be capable of transporting up to 2 people across dimensional barriers, assuming the calculations were correct and the technology actually worked as advertised. Commander Reyes made the decision that would change all our lives. Dr. Chen, I'm authorizing the mission, but with modifications. You won't be going alone, Doctor. Vasquez will accompany you as backup, and will maintain constant communication through quantum entanglement transmitters. If anything goes wrong, you abort immediately and return to our dimension. His military pragmatism provided structure to what felt like controlled chaos, giving us a framework for doing something that had never been attempted before. The final preparations took another 8 hours, during which we received 2 more transmissions from our mysterious contacts. Each message was shorter and more urgent than the last, with background sounds that suggested increasing activity on their end. In the final communication, the woman's voice carried an edge of desperation that made my skin crawl. Dr. Chen, you must hurry. The others have begun moving their forces into position. Once they establish dimensional anchors in your reality, peaceful contact will become impossible. As Elena and I made final adjustments to our portable life support systems, Dr. Martinez conducted last-minute medical examinations to establish baseline readings for our vital signs. She attached monitoring devices to our arms and chests, equipment that would theoretically allow the medical bay to track our health status even across dimensional barriers. Her hands were steady, but I could see the worry in her eyes as she checked and rechecked every connection. Mira, Elena said quietly as we stood before the activated quantum resonance chamber. What if this is a trap? What if the people calling us aren't really human? Or what if they're human but not the good guys in whatever conflict is happening out there? Her concerns were valid. We had no way to verify the identity or intentions of our contacts beyond their voices and the technical information they'd provided. I looked around the laboratory at the faces of my colleagues, people who had become family during our months together on the research station. Commander Reyes stood at attention, ready to abort the mission if anything went wrong. Dr. Martinez monitored vital signs and dimensional readings from multiple screens. Doctor, Dane maintained communication equipment that might be our only lifeline back home. Everyone was risking their careers, and possibly their lives, to support an experiment that could end in disaster. The quantum chamber hummed to life with a sound like singing crystal, its interior filling with swirling patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. According to our instruments, the device was successfully creating a stable bridge between our dimension and the coordinates specified in the transmissions. But stability was relative. The energy readings fluctuated wildly, suggesting that our passage window would only remain open for a limited time. Elena and I stepped up to the chamber entrance, our hands clasped together in a gesture that was part friendship and part shared terror. Through the swirling energy, I could see hints of something beyond, shapes that might have been stars, colors that didn't exist in our spectrum, and what looked suspiciously like structures too geometric to be natural. We were about to become the first humans to visit another dimension, but we had no idea what was waiting for us on the other side. The sensation of stepping through the dimensional barrier was like diving into ice-cold water while being struck by lightning at the same time. Every nerve in my body screamed in protest as reality twisted around Elena and me, turning inside out in ways that made my mind struggle to process what was happening. For several terrifying seconds, I couldn't tell if we were moving forward, backward, or in directions that didn't have names, while colors that had no business existing painted themselves across my vision in impossible patterns. When the chaos finally stopped and my feet touched solid ground again, I found myself standing on what looked like a space station observation deck overlooking the most beautiful and disturbing sight I'd ever witnessed. Below us hung a planet that was identical to Earth in every visible detail. The same blue oceans, the same green and brown continents, even the same white cloud formations swirling across familiar weather patterns. But something about the perfection of it made my stomach turn, as if I was looking at a photograph that had been edited just slightly too much. Elena stumbled beside me, her face pale and her hands shaking as she tried to steady herself against a railing that gleamed with metallic perfection. "Mira, look at the cities," she whispered, pointing toward the planet's surface with a trembling finger. "They're in all the wrong places." She was right, where our Earth had sprawling, chaotic urban centers that had grown organically over centuries. This planet displayed cities arranged in perfect geometric patterns, as if someone had planned every street and building, according to mathematical formulas. The woman who had been sending us transmissions appeared from behind a curved wall, moving with graceful steps that seemed just slightly too coordinated to be completely natural. She looked human in every way that mattered, the right number of limbs, familiar facial features, even clothing that wouldn't have looked out of place on our space station. But her smile was too perfect, her eyes too bright, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same careful pronunciation we'd heard in the recordings. "Welcome, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Vasquez," she said, extending a hand in greeting that felt neither warm nor cold when I shook it. "I am Coordinator Denaya, and I represent the collective council of this dimensional reality. We are so pleased that you accepted our invitation to visit our version of Earth." Her words were friendly, but something in her tone reminded me of a tour guide who had given the same speech 1,000 times before. Elena moved closer to me, her scientific curiosity warring with instincts that screamed danger. "Coordinator Denaya, your planet looks exactly like our Earth. How is that possible?" The mathematical probability of two planets developing identical features is essentially zero. Her question was direct and challenging, the kind of inquiry that had made her an excellent research partner and occasionally gotten us both into trouble with more diplomatic colleagues. Denaya's smile never wavered, but I caught a flicker of something else in her expression, annoyance perhaps, or calculation. "Your observation is very astute, Dr. Vasquez. Our reality did not develop independently. We have been carefully maintaining consistency with your dimension for many centuries, ensuring that our worlds remain synchronized despite the natural drift that typically occurs between parallel realities." Her explanation raised more questions than it answered, particularly about why anyone would want to maintain such synchronization. The observation deck extended in both directions, and as we walked along its length, I began to notice other figures moving in the distance. They all looked human at first glance, but there was something unsettling about the way they moved in perfect coordination, as if they were all following the same invisible choreographer. When one turned to look in our direction, the others turned at exactly the same moment, their heads moving with mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. Denaya gestured toward a series of screens that lined the observation deck's inner wall, displays showing real-time images from various locations across the planet below. "We have been studying your dimension for quite some time. learning about your customs, your technologies, your social structures. Your species is fascinating in its diversity and creativity, qualities that we find useful. The pause before that last word was barely perceptible, but it sent chills down my spine. Elena stopped walking abruptly, her attention caught by one of the display screens that showed what looked like our own research station Omega-7. Denia, this is our station. How are you getting these images? Are you monitoring our dimension in real time? Her voice carried a mix of scientific fascination and growing alarm as she realized the implications of what we were seeing. Of course, Denia replied with that same unsettling smile. How else could we maintain consistency between our realities? We monitor thousands of locations across your dimension, tracking changes and developments that might require adjustments to our own world. It is quite a complex undertaking, but the results speak for themselves. She gestured toward the planet below, which continued to look disturbingly perfect in its Earth-like appearance. The revelation that they had been watching us for centuries while maintaining a duplicate Earth raised questions that made my head spin. Why would anyone invest so much effort in copying another reality? What was the purpose of such elaborate synchronization? And most importantly, what did they want from Elena and me specifically? The answers weren't coming fast enough for my growing anxiety about our situation. Dr. Dane's voice suddenly crackled through our communication devices, cutting through the alien atmosphere with familiar human urgency. Mira, Elena, we're detecting massive energy buildups at multiple points around the station. Whatever's happening over there, it's affecting our local space in ways we don't understand. Our instruments are going crazy with readings we've never seen before. His report confirmed my worst fears. Our visit to this dimension was triggering consequences we hadn't anticipated. Denia's expression shifted slightly, losing some of its artificial warmth and revealing something harder underneath. Your colleagues are detecting the arrival of the entities we warned you about. They call themselves the Harvesters, and they have been observing your dimension far longer than we have. Unlike us, they are not interested in peaceful coexistence or cultural exchange. Her tone became more serious, and for the first time since our arrival, she sounded genuinely concerned about something. Elena and I exchanged glances, both realizing that we had walked into the middle of some kind of interdimensional conflict that we didn't understand. The Harvesters, whoever or whatever they were, apparently represented a threat serious enough to worry beings who could duplicate entire planets. Our simple mission to make first contact had suddenly become much more complicated and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The observation deck began to vibrate with a low-frequency hum that I could feel in my bones, and the perfect Earth below us flickered like a television with poor reception. Through the transparent walls of the station, I could see dark shapes moving against the star field, vessels or entities that were definitely not human in origin, approaching with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested hostile intent. "Coordinator Denia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear building in my chest. "What exactly do these Harvesters want with our dimension? And why did you bring us here just as they were arriving?" My questions carried an accusation that I wasn't entirely sure I meant to voice, but the timing of events felt too convenient to be coincidental. Denia turned to face us fully, and for a moment her perfect human mask slipped enough to reveal something else looking out through her eyes. "Dr. Chen, the Harvesters do not want your dimension, they want your species. Humans possess certain qualities that are rare in the universe, qualities that they have been harvesting from other realities for millennia. We brought you here because we need your help to stop them before they begin collecting from your Earth." The weight of her words settled over the observation deck like a heavy blanket, transforming our simple first contact mission into something that could determine the fate of everyone we'd ever known. Elena's hand found mine, her fingers cold and trembling as we both realized that we might be the only ones standing between Earth and predators we couldn't even comprehend. The floor beneath our feet suddenly tilted at a dangerous angle as something massive collided with the observation station, sending Elena and me crashing into the transparent wall with enough force to crack the reinforced material. Through the spider web of fractures, I could see enormous dark shapes moving through space like living shadows, their forms shifting and changing in ways that hurt my eyes to follow directly. The Harvesters had arrived, and they were nothing like the human-appearing beings who had been hosting us on this perfect replica of an Earth station. Coordinator Denia moved with inhuman speed to a control panel that materialized from the wall at her touch, her fingers dancing across surfaces that glowed with alien symbols. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, we must evacuate this observation deck immediately. The harvesters are using gravitational weapons to destabilize our defensive platforms, and this station will not survive a direct assault. Her voice had lost all pretense of human warmth, becoming mechanical and efficient as she worked to coordinate what looked like a desperate military response. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, as we followed Denia through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as we moved, walls flowing like liquid to create new passages and seal off damaged sections. The technology surrounding us was so far beyond anything from our dimension that I couldn't even begin to understand how it worked. But one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. Despite their advanced capabilities, Denia's people were losing this battle against the approaching harvesters. Elena grabbed my arm as we reached what appeared to be an elevator shaft, except instead of cables and pulleys, the transport system used some kind of controlled gravity field that made my stomach lurch as we descended rapidly toward the station's lower levels. "Mira, look at the other passengers," she whispered urgently, nodding toward the dozen figures sharing our descent. They all looked human, but they moved with the same perfect coordination we'd noticed earlier, and their eyes held an emptiness that made me think of sleepwalkers. The elevator stopped at a level marked with symbols that meant nothing to me, opening into a vast chamber filled with technology that defied description. Massive cylindrical structures stretched from floor to ceiling, each one pulsing with energy patterns that reminded me of heartbeats or brainwaves. But what made my blood run cold was the realization that each cylinder contained a human figure floating in some kind of suspended animation, their bodies connected to the machinery by cables that looked disturbingly organic. "What is this place?" I demanded, turning to face Denia with growing horror. "These are people from our dimension, aren't they? You've been taking humans from Earth and bringing them here." The evidence was overwhelming. The faces in the cylinders were clearly from our reality. Men and women who looked like they could have been my neighbors or colleagues, all trapped in whatever nightmare technology surrounded us. Denia's expression became defensive, but for the first time since we'd met her, she looked genuinely uncomfortable with the questions we were asking. "Dr. Chen, you must understand that we are fighting a war for survival against an enemy that harvests entire civilizations. These volunteers from your dimension provide us with the creativity and adaptability we need to develop new defensive strategies. They are partners in our struggle, not prisoners." Elena moved closer to one of the cylinders, studying the monitoring equipment attached to its human occupant with the trained eye of a scientist. These readings show neural activity patterns consistent with active dreaming, but the subjects appear to be unconscious. "Denia, how exactly are these people volunteering if they're not even awake to give consent?" Her medical knowledge was limited, but she knew enough to recognize that something deeply wrong was happening in this chamber. The station shuddered again as more impacts struck the outer hull, and through the chamber's speakers came the sound of explosions and what might have been screaming from other parts of the facility. Whatever battle was raging outside was getting closer, and our hosts were clearly losing ground to the mysterious harvesters. But I was beginning to wonder if we had chosen the wrong side in this interdimensional conflict. Dr. Dane's voice crackled through our communication devices again, but this time the signal was weak and filled with static. "Mira, Elena, can you hear me? Something's happening to our station. We're detecting massive energy drains, and several crew members have reported strange dreams about being somewhere else. Commander Reyes wants you to return immediately if possible." His report confirmed my worst fears. The effects of this dimensional conflict were already reaching back to our reality. Denia led us deeper into the chamber, past rows of cylinders containing sleeping humans toward what appeared to be a central control area. The harvesters operate by consuming the collective consciousness of entire species, absorbing their knowledge, creativity, and life force to fuel their expansion across dimensions. We discovered long ago that the only effective defense against them is to preserve samples of threatened civilizations in controlled environments. The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. These weren't volunteers or partners. They were specimens being preserved in some kind of interdimensional zoo, while their home reality was harvested by creatures beyond our understanding. But if Denia's people were supposedly protecting us, why did I feel like we had walked into an equally horrible trap? Elena stopped walking abruptly, her face pale with realization. "Mira, the perfect Earth we saw from the observation deck, it's not a copy of our planet. It's a backup. They're planning to replace our reality with their controlled version after the harvesters finish destroying the original." Her voice carried the kind of horrified understanding that comes from putting together pieces of a puzzle that reveals a picture no one wants to see. Through the chamber's transparent ceiling, I could see the battle raging in space above us. The harvesters moved like living storms, their dark forms absorbing light and matter as they advanced on the station's defensive systems. But there was something organized about their attack, as if they were following a specific plan rather than simply destroying everything in their path. They weren't just predators, they were intelligent, strategic, and terrifyingly effective. "Coordinator Denier," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the chaos surrounding us. "How many other realities have you preserved this way? How many civilizations are stored in chambers like this one across your dimension?" The question felt important, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Denier hesitated for the first time since we'd met her, her perfect composure cracking slightly under the weight of our questions and the ongoing battle. "Dr. Chen, we have been fighting the harvesters for over 2,000 years. In that time, we have managed to preserve samples from nearly 400 different realities before they could be completely consumed. Your dimension is special because it shows such remarkable resistance to harvester influence." The chamber's lights flickered as another massive impact struck the station, and several of the cylindrical containers began showing warning indicators that suggested their occupants were in distress. Whatever was happening outside was affecting the delicate systems that kept these preserved humans alive, and I realized with growing horror that Elena and I might be witnessing the death of hundreds of people from our own reality. Elena moved to one of the malfunctioning cylinders, her hands hovering over controls she didn't understand, but desperately wanted to help with. "Denier, these people are dying. Whatever your preservation system is, it's failing. We need to get them back to our dimension where they can receive proper medical care." Her words carried the urgency of someone who had taken an oath to do no harm, even in circumstances that defied all medical training. The battle sounds from above were getting louder and more chaotic, suggesting that the harvesters were breaking through the station's defenses. But as I looked around the chamber at the sleeping faces of people who might have been kidnapped from Earth, I began to wonder if being captured by the harvesters would actually be worse than remaining under the protection of Denier's collective council. "Dr. Chen," Denier said, her voice taking on a new urgency, "the harvesters have breached our outer perimeter. In approximately 6 minutes, they will reach this preservation chamber. We have prepared an escape vessel that can return you to your dimension, but we can only save a limited number of the preserved specimens. You must choose who lives and who dies." The weight of that impossible choice settled over the chamber, like a suffocating blanket, while outside the sounds of destruction grew closer and more terrifying with each passing second. The preservation chamber's alarm system screamed with a sound like breaking glass as the first harvester broke through the ceiling in an explosion of twisted metal and sparking electronics. What emerged from the wreckage wasn't the dark shadow I'd expected, but something that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing, a being that seemed to be made of living light and shadow combined, constantly shifting between forms that might have been beautiful if they weren't so utterly alien and terrifying. Elena pulled me behind one of the cylindrical containers as the creature moved through the chamber with fluid grace, its attention focused on the sleeping humans rather than on us. Where it touched the preservation cylinders, the technology began to change, becoming more organic and somehow hungrier in appearance. The humans inside started twitching and moving as if they were having nightmares, their peaceful sleep replaced by obvious distress that made my heart ache with helplessness. Coordinator Denier was no longer bothering to maintain her human appearance, her form shifting and flowing like mercury as she fought against 2 more harvesters that had entered through different breaches in the chamber walls. The battle was unlike anything I'd ever imagined, beings of pure energy clashing in ways that sent ripples through reality itself, causing the air around them to shimmer and bend like heated glass. "Elena, we need to find the escape vessel Denier mentioned," I whispered urgently, trying to navigate through the chaos while staying hidden from the battling entities. "But we can't leave these people here to be harvested or whatever these creatures do to their victims." The moral weight of abandoning hundreds of sleeping humans to an unknown fate felt impossible to bear, even though I had no idea how we could possibly save them. Dr. Dane's voice suddenly burst through our communication devices with crystal clarity, cutting through the battle noise with emergency intensity. "Mira, Elena, listen carefully. We've figured out what's happening to our station. The energy drains aren't random. Something is copying our crew members and replacing them with duplicates. Commander Reyes says 3 people have already been replaced with perfect copies that behave exactly like the originals, except for subtle differences in their memories. The implications of his report sent ice through my veins, as I realized that the preservation chamber we were in might not be the only place where humans were being collected and studied. If the effects were reaching back to our dimension, then both the collective council and the harvesters were actively interfering with our reality, regardless of whatever conflict they were fighting between themselves. Elena found a control panel near the chamber's emergency exit and began working with the desperate efficiency of someone who understood that time was running out. Mira, these systems are based on the same quantum principles as your dimensional transport device. I think I can modify the chamber's power grid to send all these preservation cylinders back to our dimension simultaneously. Her plan was ambitious and dangerous, but it offered hope for saving people who might otherwise become casualties of an interdimensional war they never chose to join. One of the harvesters suddenly turned its attention toward us, and I got my first clear look at something that challenged every assumption I'd made about intelligent life in the universe. The creature wasn't malevolent in any recognizable way. It seemed more like a force of nature, driven by needs and purposes that were completely alien to human understanding. But when it moved in our direction, reality seemed to bend around it in ways that made my vision blur and my thoughts scatter. Denia appeared between us and the advancing harvester, her form now resembling something that might have been human once but had been transformed by centuries of interdimensional conflict. Dr. Chen, you must activate the emergency transport now. The harvesters are beginning their consciousness absorption process, and once it starts, these preserved specimens will be lost forever. Her voice carried an urgency that suggested we had seconds, rather than minutes, to act. The chamber filled with a sound like singing crystal as Elena activated her improvised rescue system, but instead of the gentle hum I'd expected, the preservation cylinders began cracking open with violent hisses of escaping gas. The sleeping humans inside started awakening, their eyes unfocused and confused as they struggled to understand where they were and what was happening to them. Some were clearly from our time period, but others wore clothing and had features that suggested they'd been taken from different eras of Earth's history. "Everyone stay calm," I called out, trying to project confidence. I didn't feel as dozens of disoriented people began climbing out of their shattered containers. "We're going to get you home, but we need to work together to reach the transport system." Many of them looked at me with recognition, as if they'd seen my face in dreams or visions during their preservation sleep, which raised disturbing questions about how much the collective council had been manipulating their unconscious minds. The battle between Denia and the harvesters was reaching a crescendo that threatened to tear the chamber apart, with energy discharges that left scorch marks on the walls and created pockets of twisted space where the laws of physics seemed to have broken down. But through the chaos, I began to notice something strange about the way the harvesters were fighting. They weren't trying to destroy the humans or even capture them. Instead, they seemed to be attempting to free them from the preservation technology. Elena grabbed my arm with hands that shook from exhaustion and fear. "Mira, look at the readings from the transport system. It's not just sending these people back to our dimension. It's creating multiple destination points across different time periods. Some of them are going to arrive decades before they were originally taken." Her discovery added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation, suggesting that our rescue attempt might be creating paradoxes that could affect the entire timeline. One of the awakened humans, a woman who looked like she might have been a scientist or engineer, stumbled toward us with desperation in her eyes. "Are you Dr. Mira Chen? I've been dreaming about you for months. In the dreams, you were the one who would come to save us from the false saviors who promised protection but gave us slavery instead." Her words confirmed my growing suspicion that the Collective Council's preservation program was far more sinister than Denia had admitted. The transport system reached critical activation levels just as the largest harvester I'd seen yet broke through the chamber's main wall, its presence causing reality to ripple like water around a dropped stone. But instead of the destructive force I'd expected, the creature moved with careful precision toward the awakening humans, and when it touched them, they didn't scream in pain. They sighed in relief, as if a weight they'd carried for years was finally being lifted from their shoulders. Denia's voice carried across the chamber with a tone of desperate anger that revealed more truth than all her previous careful explanations. "The harvesters are disrupting our preservation matrix. Without our protection, these humans will return to their original timeline and face the natural disasters and conflicts that would have destroyed their civilizations anyway." We were saving them from inevitable extinction. Elena activated the final sequence of her improvised rescue system, but as the humans began disappearing in flashes of interdimensional light, I realized that we still didn't understand the true nature of the conflict we'd stumbled into. Were the harvesters really the predators Denia had described, or were they liberators trying to free people from a form of benevolent tyranny? The answer might determine not just the fate of the people we were trying to save, but the future of our entire reality. The chamber began collapsing around us as the battle reached its climax, but through the chaos and destruction, I could hear something that made my heart race with new hope. The sound of human voices calling out to each other, working together to help the weak and protect the vulnerable, proving that even in the most impossible circumstances, people would choose to care for one another rather than save themselves. The world exploded into blinding white light as Elena's transport system overloaded, sending cascades of interdimensional energy through the collapsing chamber that felt like being inside a lightning bolt during an earthquake. When my vision cleared, I found myself floating in what appeared to be empty space, surrounded by dozens of the rescued humans who looked just as confused and terrified as I felt. But this wasn't the cold vacuum of normal space. We could breathe here, and strange currents of warm air carried voices and sounds from places that seemed both familiar and impossible. Elena materialized beside me, her face pale but determined as she clutched a portable scanner that was beeping frantically with readings that made no sense according to any physics I understood. "Mira, we're not in our dimension anymore, but we're not in the collective council's reality either. This is something completely different, like a space between spaces where the normal rules don't apply." Her scientific training was struggling to process an environment that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of conventional reality. Around us, the rescued humans were beginning to organize themselves into groups, their voices creating a strange harmony as they called out names and tried to find family members or friends who had been taken from Earth at different times. What struck me most was how they seemed to remember things that hadn't happened yet, events from their futures that they couldn't possibly have experienced while sleeping in the preservation cylinders. A young man who looked like he might have been a college student approached us with eyes that held knowledge far beyond his apparent age. "Dr. Chen, you need to understand that the Collective Council and the Harvesters aren't enemies fighting a war. They're two parts of the same system, working together to process civilizations through what they call the selection protocol. The conflict you witnessed was theater designed to make you choose a side." His words hit me like ice water, forcing me to reconsider everything we'd experienced since receiving the first transmission. If the dramatic battle between Denia's people and the Harvesters had been staged, then Elena and I hadn't stumbled into an interdimensional conflict. We'd been deliberately manipulated into participating in some kind of elaborate test or experiment. Elena's scanner suddenly erupted with new readings that made her gasp in shock. "Mira, I'm detecting massive structures all around us, but they're existing in dimensions we can't normally perceive. It's like we're inside some kind of gigantic facility that extends through multiple realities simultaneously." Her discovery explained the strange properties of our current environment, but raised even more disturbing questions about who had built such a place and why. Through the shifting currents of this interdimensional space, shapes began to become visible, vast geometric forms that stretched beyond the horizon, connected by bridges and tunnels that seemed to be made of crystallized light. The architecture was clearly artificial, but built on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had ever constructed. We weren't just between dimensions, we were inside something that had been designed to exist between dimensions. Dr. Dane's voice reached us through our communication devices, but this time it sounded different, as if he was speaking from very far away or through layers of interference. "Mira, Elena, wherever you are, you need to know that time is moving differently here. From our perspective, you've been gone for 3 days, but our instruments show that you're somehow existing in multiple time streams simultaneously." The rescued humans were moving with purpose now, as if they remembered instructions or training they'd received during their preservation sleep. They formed lines and began walking towards structures that materialized out of the interdimensional space as they approached. Buildings that looked like they'd been designed by someone who understood human needs, but wasn't quite human themselves. An older woman who carried herself with the authority of a natural leader gestured for Elena and me to follow the group toward what appeared to be a central hub surrounded by smaller buildings. "Dr. Chen, the entities you met aren't the real controllers of this system. They're just the interface, designed to interact with newly contacted civilizations in ways that won't cause immediate psychological breakdown. The actual administrators of the selection protocol are something much older and more alien. As we walked through the crystalline corridors of the interdimensional facility, I began to notice that the walls themselves were displaying images and information, not on screens or displays, but somehow embedded in the structure itself. The images showed thousands of different worlds, different species, different civilizations, all being processed through various stages of what looked like the same system we'd encountered. Elena stopped suddenly, pointing to a section of wall that showed images of Earth from different time periods, but not just our Earth. Dozens of different versions of our planet, some where the continents were arranged differently, some where different species had evolved as the dominant life forms, some where technology had developed along completely different paths. Mira, they're not just studying one version of humanity. They're running the selection protocol on every possible variation of human civilization. The implications were staggering. If every possible version of Earth was being processed through this system, then the choice between preservation and harvesting wasn't about saving or destroying humanity. It was about determining which versions of human civilization would be allowed to continue existing and which would be archived as historical specimens. The central hub opened before us like a flower blooming, revealing a chamber that contained what could only be described as a living map of the multiverse. Streams of light connected countless points that represented different realities, different timelines, different possibilities for how existence itself could unfold. But many of the connections were dark, suggesting realities that had been terminated or absorbed into the larger system. Elena's scanner was now producing readings so complex that she could barely interpret them, but one pattern was clear enough to make her face go white with terror. Mira, according to these measurements, our original dimension, our Earth, it's scheduled for processing in less than 72 hours. Everything we've experienced, everyone we've met, it was all designed to evaluate whether our version of humanity deserves preservation or harvesting. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere, filling the chamber with words that bypassed our ears and spoke directly to our consciousness. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, you have performed admirably in the evaluation process. Your resourcefulness, creativity, and compassion for your fellow humans have been noted and recorded. The time has come for you to understand your true purpose in the selection protocol. The rescued humans around us began to glow with soft light, their forms becoming translucent as they started to fade from view. But instead of looking afraid, they seemed peaceful, even grateful, as if they were finally going home after a long and difficult journey. The last to fade was the young man who had first told us about the selection protocol, and his final words carried a warning that chilled me to the bone. Dr. Chen, the choice you make in the next chamber will determine not just the fate of your Earth, but the fate of every possible Earth that could ever exist. Choose carefully, because some doors can never be opened again, and some choices can never be undone. The chamber beyond the hub contained something that my mind initially refused to process: 3 perfect copies of Elena and me, each standing before a different doorway that led to realities I could glimpse but not fully comprehend. The copies looked exactly like us down to the smallest detail, including the same clothes, the same injuries from our interdimensional journey, even the same expression of confused terror that I could feel on my own face. The voice that had spoken to us before now took on a more personal tone, as if whatever intelligence controlled this facility had decided we were worthy of direct communication. Dr. Chen, you are experiencing the final stage of the selection protocol. The entities you know as the Collective Council and the Harvesters were created to test different aspects of your species' response to existential threats. Your reactions have been most illuminating. Elena grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin as she stared at her own duplicates. Mira, those aren't copies. They're us. Different versions from alternate timelines where we made different choices during our journey. The one on the left looks terrified, the middle one looks angry, and the one on the right. She trailed off because the third Elena was smiling with a calm confidence that neither of us felt. Through the first doorway, I could see our original Earth, but it was wrong in subtle ways that made my stomach clench with recognition. The cities were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, the people moved with synchronized precision, and everything looked beautiful and efficient, and completely devoid of the chaotic creativity that made humanity human. It was the Collective Council's version of preservation. Safety bought at the price of everything that made life worth living. The second doorway revealed an Earth that was obviously dying, oceans boiled away, Continents cracked and burning, the sky filled with ash and the remnants of failed civilizations. But among the ruins, small groups of humans continued to struggle and fight and create, their art and music and stories becoming more beautiful and desperate as their world collapsed around them. This was the harvester's path, freedom to choose extinction rather than accept imposed salvation. Elena moved toward the third doorway, her face pale but determined as she studied what lay beyond. Mirror. This one shows an Earth that's completely different from both the others. The people there have access to interdimensional technology, but they're using it to help other civilizations instead of controlling them. They've broken free from the selection protocol entirely and become something new. The voice continued its explanation, with the patience of something that had conducted this same conversation countless times across multiple realities. Each doorway represents a choice made by different versions of your species when faced with the same decision you now confront. The first leads to preservation under benevolent guidance. The second leads to harvesting through natural consequence. The third leads to transcendence through rejection of the entire system. I studied the three versions of myself standing before each doorway, trying to understand what they represented. The first, Mira, looked small and defeated, as if she'd given up fighting for her own agency. The second Mira burned with defiant rage, choosing destruction over submission. But the third Mira radiated a calm strength that suggested she'd found a fourth option that none of us had considered. Dr. Dane's voice suddenly burst through our communication devices with desperate urgency that cut through the surreal atmosphere of the choice chamber. Mira, Elena, you need to hear this. We've been monitoring the energy signatures from your location, and we think we've figured out how to collapse the entire interdimensional facility from our end. But we need you to destabilize their power source from the inside. The implications of his plan were staggering. If we could destroy the facility that administered the selection protocol, we might be able to free not just our own Earth, but every civilization that was currently being processed through the system. But the risk was enormous. If we failed, we could trap ourselves permanently in the interdimensional space, leaving our home reality defenseless against whatever backup systems the protocol administrators had in place. Elena studied her scanner readings with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that could save or damn the entire human race. Mira, I'm detecting massive power conduits running beneath this chamber. If we could overload the system using the same quantum resonance principles that brought us here, we might be able to create a cascade failure that would shut down the entire selection protocol permanently. The voice that controlled the facility seemed amused rather than concerned by our conversation. Dr. Chen, you have discovered the fourth option that most species never consider. Rather than choosing between preservation, harvesting, or transcendence, you are contemplating rebellion against the entire system. This choice has been made before, though rarely with success. Through the chamber's crystalline walls, I could see other facilities in the distance. Vast structures processing different aspects of the multiverse according to rules and purposes that stretched beyond human comprehension. Our choice wouldn't just affect humanity, it would impact every species, every civilization, every possible variation of consciousness that existed across all realities. The three versions of Elena began moving toward their respective doorways, but as they walked, they started looking back at us with expressions that carried warnings, encouragement, and desperate hope. The Elena heading toward preservation mouthed the word safety. The one choosing harvesting whispered, freedom. And the one walking toward transcendence smiled and said something I couldn't hear but somehow understood. Together. Elena and I looked at each other, and in that moment of perfect understanding that comes from years of partnership and friendship, we made our choice. Instead of walking toward any of the three doorways, we moved toward the center of the chamber where the power conduits Elena had detected were strongest. If we were going to save humanity, we were going to do it on our own terms, not according to rules imposed by entities who treated entire civilizations like specimens in a cosmic laboratory. The voice spoke one final time, and for the first time since we'd entered the facility, it sounded genuinely surprised. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, you are choosing to destroy a system that has maintained order across the multiverse for millions of years. Are you certain that the chaos you unleash will be preferable to the stability you reject? Elena began configuring her quantum resonance device to overload the facility's power grid, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what we were attempting. Mira, whatever happens next, I want you to know that I've never been more proud to be human than I am right now. We're going to give our species the chance to make their own mistakes and find their own path forward. As the chamber began to vibrate with building energy, I realized that our journey across the galaxy had brought us to the most important choice in human history, not just for our Earth, but for every possible version of humanity that existed across the infinite expanse of parallel realities. The outcome was uncertain, the risks were enormous, but for the first time since we'd left Research Station Omega-7, I felt like we were truly fighting for something worth saving. The power conduits beneath our feet began to crack and spark, sending cascades of interdimensional energy through the facility's structure as alarms sounded in frequencies that hurt to hear. In the distance, other chambers were going dark as the cascade failure spread, freeing countless preserved civilizations and shutting down harvesting operations that had been running for eons. We had chosen chaos over control, uncertainty over safety, and the terrifying freedom to determine our own destiny rather than accept someone else's vision of what humanity should become.